At 19, she had known little of the world beyond the dusty roads of her father's farm. The wind carried secrets across the plains, and she often felt a restless pull she could not name. Her name was Leora, and though her eyes were wide with innocence, there was a spark in them that whispered of courage and fire. Life had been predictable, safe in its small routines, until the day strangers arrived with offers that seemed golden, but were tinged with shadows. They told her father she was to be sold, a transaction wrapped in promises of security and opportunity. But Leora's heart rebelled at the thought of leaving her home, leaving the fields she had grown to love. The men spoke of distant lands, of adventures she could only dream of, yet in their eyes she saw a coldness that made her shiver. She had no choice. The world she thought she knew had slipped from her grasp, and the road ahead was one of uncertainty. The journey west was long and unforgiving. Leora sat atop the wagon, her hands gripping the worn wood as the landscape changed from gentle hills to rugged wild plains. The sky above burned in shades of orange and crimson, a warning she did not yet understand. She had heard stories of the Apache, of their fierce warriors and untamed ways. She had imagined them as shadows on the horizon, distant and untouchable. Yet now, the tales she had heard began to feel alarmingly real. He appeared without warning, a solitary figure astride a black horse, his presence commanding the open land itself. His name was Te, which meant he who moves like the wind. There was a stillness about him, a quiet that carried authority, yet beneath it ran a current of something softer, something that spoke of hidden depths. His dark hair framed a face carved from experience, his eyes sharp and observant, yet when they fell upon Leora, a flicker of curiosity and restraint softened their edge. He was a man who had lived on the fringes of the world, a protector of the land and the secrets it held. The first moments they shared were charged with tension. Leora's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from an unexpected awareness that this man, this lonely Apache, would change everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. Te's voice, low and measured, cut through the wind like a familiar song she could not name. He did not speak of love, not yet. But in the way he observed the horizon, in the way his gaze lingered on her with a mixture of caution and something unspoken, she felt a connection that neither fully understood nor could resist. Life in the frontier was harsh. Days bled into nights under a sky spattered with stars, and the earth seemed both friend and foe. Leora quickly realized that survival depended on more than just strength. It demanded adaptability, respect, and a willingness to learn from the land and the people who called it home. Te taught her quietly, with patience that masked the weight of his own solitude. He showed her how to read the wind, to listen to the whispers of the river, to understand the rhythm of the plains. Each lesson was more than survival. It was an initiation into a world that had once seemed wild and frightening, but now shimmered with hidden beauty. Despite the isolation, Leora discovered that the land itself seemed alive with stories. She found herself drawn to Te not merely as a protector or a guide, but as a mirror to her own untamed spirit. He was strict, demanding even, yet moments of gentleness pierced the hard edges of their lives. A shared fire at night, the quiet exchange of glances, the unspoken understanding that sometimes words were unnecessary, all of it built a tension that neither could ignore. Leora felt the stirrings of desire and admiration mingling with fear and uncertainty, a blend that left her both exhilarated and wary. The towns and settlements they passed through were wary of strangers, yet Te moved among them with a quiet respect that belied his reputation. There were whispers of his prowess, of the solitary life he had chosen after loss and betrayal, yet in Leora's presence, a different side of him emerged. She saw flashes of humor, moments of patience, and a surprising tenderness reserved only for her. She did not know why she inspired such care, nor did she question it. It was enough that he did, enough that the lonely Apache had not turned away from her, even when the world seemed intent on doing so. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of crimson and gold, Te led Leora to a high ridge overlooking the valley below. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying the scent of sage and pine. He did not speak at first. Instead, he handed her a small, polished stone, smooth and warm from the sun. "This land holds many secrets," he said finally, his voice barely above the whisper of the wind, "and soon you will learn that not all of them are meant to frighten you." Leora held the stone, feeling its weight as if it carried the unspoken history of the plains. She wanted to ask him what he meant, to unravel the threads of mystery that clung to him, but a sudden movement in the shadows drew their attention. Eyes glinting in the fading light, a figure watched from the distant tree line. The tension in the air thickened, and Leora realized with a pang that the world she had been thrust into was more dangerous than she had imagined. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of excitement ignited. The unknown, the danger, and Tay's presence intertwined, creating a current that pulled her forward with a force she could not resist. That night, as they camped beneath the stars, Leora could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the quiet breathing of Tay, the whisper of the wind through the trees, and the distant howl of a coyote. Her thoughts swirled with questions. What did the future hold for her in this untamed land? Could she survive the challenges to come? And why did she feel with every heartbeat that meeting Tay had altered the very course of her life? Morning brought no answers, only the soft light of dawn illuminating the rugged beauty around them. Leora knew that she could not turn back, that the road ahead would demand courage, resilience, and a willingness to embrace a life far different from the one she had left behind. And Tay, silent and resolute, would be at her side, sometimes a guide, sometimes a mystery. Always a force she could neither ignore nor fully understand. As they mounted their horses to continue westward, a sudden gust of wind carried a distant sound, sharp and unmistakable. Leora's pulse quickened. Somewhere beyond the ridges and valleys, a presence awaited, one that promised danger, revelation, and change. She glanced at Tay, whose gaze was fixed on the horizon, unflinching and unreadable. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The journey had only begun, and what lay ahead would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. With the plains stretching endlessly before them, Leora's heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. The world she had known was gone, replaced by a land of wind, wild beauty, and uncharted mysteries. And the man who had seemed so remote, so untouchable, now held a power over her heart that neither distance nor danger could diminish. And then, as the sun rose fully over the horizon, painting the land in hues of gold and fire, Leora realized that everything she had known about life, love, and destiny was about to change. The question lingered in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Would she survive this new life? And would her heart endure the pull of a man whose past was as shadowed as the wilderness around them? The answer, like the wind across the plains, was unpredictable, and the story of Leora and Tay was only beginning. The wind carried a chill that morning, sharper than it had been the day before, as if the land itself whispered warnings. Leora tightened the cloak around her shoulders, trying to hold back the tremor she refused to admit was fear. The plains stretched endlessly, yet even in their openness, shadows clung to the hollows and ridges, hiding secrets she could sense but not yet name. Beside her, Tay rode silently, his posture unyielding, eyes scanning the horizon as if the world beyond the mountains held answers only he could read. She wanted to ask him about his life, about the quiet strength that seemed to ripple through him like a hidden river, but she hesitated. Tay did not speak of his past freely. There were hints, fragments she caught in the soft tones of his voice, or the way his gaze darkened when he stared into the distance. But full truths were locked away, buried deep beneath a lifetime of solitude and loss. Leora sensed that patience would be her only ally if she hoped to uncover them, and yet curiosity gnawed at her, a persistent spark that refused to fade. As they rode, the land changed beneath them. Rolling hills gave way to jagged cliffs, the earth dry and cracked from seasons without mercy. Wildlife moved cautiously in the distance, wary of intruders in this unclaimed stretch of territory. Tay had taught her to notice the subtle signs, the tracks of deer, the faint scrape of a coyote's claws, the way the wind shifted through the canyons. Each detail was a lesson, a thread in the intricate tapestry of survival. Leora tried to absorb it all, but her thoughts were often drawn to him, to the quiet power he exuded, the way his presence seemed to anchor the wild land and, strangely, her own restless heart. By mid-afternoon, they reached the edge of a small clearing where the remains of an abandoned homestead lay half-buried beneath overgrowth. Timber had rotted, stone chimneys crumbled, yet there was a strange beauty in the ruin. Leora dismounted, her boots crunching on the dried grass as she stepped closer to inspect the remnants. Tay's voice was low behind her. This land keeps its stories, he said. Some are gentle, some are cruel, and some are not finished. Leora's fingers traced the warped edges of the old doorframe. She imagined the people who had lived here, the laughter and the sorrow, and wondered what had driven them away. She felt an echo of her own displacement, the way the world had been pulled from under her so abruptly. Yet there was also a sense of wonder, a recognition that she was stepping into history, into a space where past and present collided. She could almost hear whispers in the wind, half-formed stories carried by the plains, begging to be remembered. Tay watched her from a distance, his expression unreadable. Then, as if satisfied that she had learned what he intended, he nodded toward the path that led deeper into the mountains. Leora followed, curiosity mixing with unease. She could feel the land shifting as they moved, the air growing heavier, charged with an energy she could not identify. The closer they drew to the canyon, the more alive it seemed, as if the rocks themselves were watching, waiting. At nightfall, they made camp near a narrow stream. The water sparkled faintly in the firelight, and Leora knelt to drink, the chill of the mountain night biting at her hands. Tay sat across from her, sharpening a knife with a steady rhythm that made the small sparks leap into the darkness. Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet electric, the kind of silence that held both protection and warning. Leora felt herself leaning unconsciously toward him, drawn by the magnetism of a man whose life had been shaped by solitude and secrets. "You have questions," Tay said suddenly, breaking the quiet. His voice was soft but firm, carrying a weight that made her heart catch. "I can see them in your eyes. Not all answers are meant for the light. Some truths must be discovered, not told." Leora met his gaze, searching for a hint, a clue. Anything that would satisfy the restless questions pounding in her mind. She sensed layers in him, pain and pride interwoven with tenderness and courage. My God. Yet he remained enigmatic, and that mystery only drew her closer. The firelight danced across his face, casting shadows that mirrored the unknown corners of his life. Leora knew she could not rush him, nor could she ignore the pull that tightened with every heartbeat she shared in his presence. Morning brought a frost that coated the grass and glimmered on the branches. They continued their journey, moving cautiously through narrow passes where the wind roared like a living thing. Leora noticed the skill with which Tay navigated the terrain, how he anticipated every turn and obstacle with ease. She tried to mirror his movements, but she stumbled, and he caught her wrist with a grip that was firm but gentle. For a heartbeat their eyes met, and the air between them shifted, carrying a tension that neither had yet named, but both felt acutely. As the sun rose higher, they came upon an old trading post half hidden in the trees. Its windows were cracked, and the sign had long since faded, but there were signs of recent activity footprints in the dust, smoke faint on the wind. Tay's eyes narrowed, and his hand hovered near the bough strapped across his back. Leora felt a thrill of both excitement and fear. Danger, she realized, was never far in these lands. Yet it was not just the threat that held her attention, it was the thrill of discovery, the unfolding story she had stepped into, and the knowledge that Tay would stand between her and whatever dangers lurked. Inside the building, the air was heavy with dust and the scent of old wood. Leora's footsteps echoed as she moved carefully, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her. Shelves were toppled and scraps of paper littered the floor, maps and letters yellowed with age. One letter, partially torn, caught her eye. It spoke of land disputes, of promises broken, of a family driven to desperation. Her fingers trembled as she read, realizing that every place they encountered carried echoes of struggle and survival, tales of people who had lived, fought, and vanished. Tay did not speak, but she felt his presence behind her, steady and reassuring. When she finally turned, he studied her expression with a subtle intensity. "The land remembers," he said. "Every choice, every act, it leaves a mark. And some marks are not easily erased." Night fell again, bringing with it an unfamiliar stillness. Leora could not shake the feeling that eyes were watching them from the darkness beyond the firelight. She knew that danger might come from more than the land itself. Travelers, rival clans, or opportunists might be near, drawn by the stories of a lonely Apache and the girl who had come into his life. And yet, beneath the anxiety, there was a pulse of exhilaration. Leora felt alive in a way she never had, caught between fear and fascination, her heart entwined with a man whose life was as mysterious as the wind-swept plains around them. Tay finally broke the silence. "Tomorrow, we move deeper into the mountains," he said. "There is a place I must take you, a place that will show you more than words ever could. But it is not safe. The path will test you, and you must be ready for what you find." Leora's pulse quickened. She wanted to ask questions, to uncover more of the secrets he guarded, but she did not. Instead, she nodded, understanding that the journey ahead would demand courage she did not yet fully know she possessed, as she lay beneath the stars. Listening to the whisper of the wind and the distant howl of night predators, she realized that everything had changed. The world she had known was gone, replaced by a land of beauty, danger, and untold mysteries. And the man who had entered her life, the lonely Apache named Tay, was at the center of it all, a force she could neither ignore nor fully understand. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of fire, shadow, and the uncharted lands beyond the horizon. Leora awoke before dawn, feeling the weight of what was to come pressing on her chest. She knew that the next steps they took would bring revelations, challenges, and perhaps danger beyond anything she had imagined. And yet, despite the uncertainty, a quiet determination settled within her. She would follow Tay, learn from him, and confront whatever the wild land and its secrets had in store. As the first light of morning touched the peaks above them, Leora and Tay prepared to ride. The plains stretched ahead, endless and unpredictable, carrying the promise of discovery peril, and the slow unfolding of a bond neither of them fully understood. And somewhere in the distance, hidden in the folds of the mountains and shadows of the canyons, the first hints of their future awaited danger, mystery, and perhaps a love neither had yet dared to name. The journey had only begun, and the story of Leora and Tay was far from finished. The morning air was thin and sharp as Leora mounted her horse, the frost still glinting on the rocky paths that wound into the mountains. Tay rode beside her, silent as always, his eyes scanning every ridge and hollow as if he could read the land like a book. There was a tension in the air that Leora could feel in her bones, a sense that the mountains themselves were watching, testing their resolve. She tightened her hands around the reins, trying to steady the fluttering in her chest that was equal parts fear and anticipation. "Stay close," Tay said finally, his voice calm but firm. "The path narrows ahead. One wrong step, and it could cost more than you realize." Leora nodded, grateful for his warning, yet unsettled by the weight behind it. She had learned to read the signs of the land, but there were things no training could prepare her. 4 things that came from people, from intention, from shadows that moved with purpose. And there was a sense that the world beyond these mountains was not just wild, but dangerous in ways she could not yet imagine. The climb was treacherous. Loose stones slid beneath the horse's hooves, and the wind whipped through the canyon with a force that made Leora cling to her mount. As they ascended, she noticed marks carved into the rock symbols that were familiar yet foreign. Tay's gaze flickered to them, and he muttered words she did not understand. Leora sensed that these were warnings left by those who had come before, or perhaps by Tay himself, a code for survival only he could interpret. They camped at the edge of a narrow ledge that overlooked a hidden valley below. Smoke rose from a distant fire, and Leora could just make out the shapes of figures moving near what seemed to be an encampment. Tay crouched beside her, his face shadowed by the hood of his cloak. "They are not friendly," he said. "We are not welcome there, and they watch for weakness. You must be cautious." Leora felt her pulse quicken. The story of her journey had always seemed like a simple path of survival and discovery. But now it became clear that danger was entwined with every step she took. And yet even in the shadow of fear, she could not deny the pull she felt toward Tay. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to belong to this land in a way she never could, it made her heart ache with a longing she barely understood. As the evening wore on, she tried to push aside the unease. Focusing instead on learning from Tay, he taught her how to read the valley from above, how to anticipate the movement of the people below, and how to keep their presence hidden from prying eyes. Every lesson was a test, every glance from him a subtle reminder of the bond that was forming between them. A bond forged in silence, in shared danger, and in the quiet understanding that survival depended on trust. But the valley below held more than just strangers. Leora began to notice signs of struggle, discarded belongings, broken branches, and tracks that suggested conflict. Tay's jaw tightened as he observed them, and Leora realized that whatever awaited them in the valley was not merely a matter of curiosity or adventure, it was entangled with history, revenge, and a danger that could reach them both if they were careless. That night, Leora could not sleep. The firelight flickered across the rocks, casting long shadows that seemed to move with intent. She thought about the girl she had been before leaving home, the life she had known, and how fragile it now seemed in comparison to the wild, unpredictable world she had entered. And then there was Tay, silent and steadfast, a man whose past she only glimpsed in fragments, but whose presence dominated her thoughts. She wondered what scars he carried, what losses had driven him to a life of solitude, and whether she would ever truly know him. At dawn, they descended into the valley. Leora's hands were steady on the reins, but her heart pounded as the encampment came into view. Figures moved along the edges of the tents, and the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and tension. Tay's expression was unreadable, but she could sense the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had chosen to bring her here, but it was clear that danger waited in every shadow. "They have heard of me," he said quietly, "and now they watch for you. Be ready for anything." Leora nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. She understood that this journey was not just about survival or learning, it was about navigating a web of unseen threats, of loyalties and grudges that stretched beyond her understanding. And she realized, with a thrill and a fear she could not separate, that Tay's world was far more complex than she had imagined, and that she was now part of it. As they moved closer, she noticed a young boy darting among the tents, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Tay's gaze softened for a moment, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. "That is Kiona," he said. "He has seen much, yet he has hope. Watch him carefully, for even the smallest among them can change everything." Leora observed Kiona, fascinated by the boy's courage and resilience. He seemed both vulnerable and unshakably brave, a reflection of the land itself, harsh, yet capable of nurturing life against all odds. And in that moment, Leora felt a connection not just to Tay, but to the world they were entering, a world full of hidden stories, unspoken rules, the constant tension between survival and desire. The first encounter came unexpectedly. A figure emerged from the shadows of the largest tent, a man with a scarred face and eyes that burned with suspicion. He spoke harshly in a language Leora did not understand, but Tay's response was calm, authoritative, a mixture of warning and diplomacy. Leora watched, fascinated and terrified, as the two men circled each other in a delicate dance of power, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. The encounter ended without violence, but the tension lingered. Leora could feel it like a weight pressing down on her chest. The valley was a place of constant vigilance, where every gesture, every glance, every word could shift the balance between safety and danger. And she understood that the stakes were higher than she had imagined, that every step forward could bring both discovery and peril. Over the next days, Leora learned more about the valley, its people, and its unspoken rules. She observed alliances and rivalries, small acts of kindness and cruelty, and the intricate way in which survival demanded both strength and subtlety. Tay remained her guide, protector, and sometimes enigma, a man whose presence was a constant reminder of both safety and the unknown. She could see the burden he carried, the vigilance that never relaxed, and she wondered what ghosts haunted him in the quiet moments before dawn. Yet even amid danger, there were moments of unexpected beauty. Leora discovered hidden streams, valleys where wildflowers bloomed despite the harshness of the land, and the quiet companionship of Kiona, whose laughter reminded her that even in the midst of uncertainty, life could still be vibrant. And always there was Tay, silent, watchful, and profoundly present, a man whose strength was both protective and magnetic. Leora felt herself drawn to him in ways she could not name, a pull that was as wild and untamed as the land itself. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, Leora and Tay found themselves alone on a ridge, overlooking the valley bathed in golden light. Tay's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that carried a weight neither spoke aloud. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of fear, admiration, and something she could only call longing. Yet the moment was broken by the distant sound of voices, raised in anger, and the unmistakable tension of conflict waiting to erupt. Tay's eyes narrowed. "We are not safe here for long," he said. "The valley remembers old debts, and there are those who will test us, test you, in ways you cannot yet imagine." Leora's stomach tightened. She understood that the journey was far from over, that the mysteries of the valley, the people within it, and the man beside her were all threads in a larger tapestry she was only beginning to see. And yet, despite the fear, there was an undeniable pull toward adventure, toward danger, and toward the man whose presence had altered the course of her life. Night fell with an unsettling quiet. Leora lay awake, listening to the wind threading through the canyons and the distant howls that hinted at predators both animal and human. Her thoughts swirled with questions. What secrets did the valley hide? What pasts were entwined in Tay's eyes? And what trials awaited them both? And beneath it all, a spark of anticipation and desire burned, the promise of discoveries that would test courage, loyalty, and the strength of a heart ready to face the unknown. The journey had deepened, the conflict had grown. Leora knew, with both excitement and dread, that the valley, the people within it, and the lonely Apache she had been sold to were all part of a story that was far from finished. A story where danger, love, and destiny collided with every passing day. And as the wind swept across the mountains, carrying whispers she could almost understand, she realized that everything, her past, her future, and the path she now walked, was about to change forever. The valley had grown darker than Leora had ever known it, the shadows stretching like long fingers across the narrow paths. Even the wind seemed wary, whispering warnings she could feel in her chest. She rode close to Tay, the cold pressing through her cloak, the tension between them almost tangible. Each step of the horse was careful, deliberate, as though the earth itself demanded respect. Her pulse beat in time with the rhythm of the journey, and she realized she had grown accustomed to the constant uncertainty, but tonight the weight of it felt heavier than ever. Tay's hand brushed hers as he adjusted his grip on the reins. The touch was brief, almost imperceptible, but it made her heart stutter. She wanted to look at him, to search for the unspoken words in his eyes, but the darkness around them demanded vigilance. Every ridge, every shadow, every distant sound was a possible threat. The valley held more than memories. It held secrets that could shift the balance of power in a heartbeat. They dismounted near a narrow canyon, the walls rising on either side like silent sentinels. Tay crouched, signaling her to do the same. He gestured toward the mouth of the canyon, where figures moved with quiet precision, shadows among shadows. Leora's breath caught as she counted them, 6 men armed, watching for intruders. Her stomach twisted with fear, yet beneath it there was a thrill, a realization that danger, however terrifying, had become a part of her life. Tay's voice was barely audible. "They are expecting us, and they know who we are. But if we move carefully, we can reach the other side without being noticed." Leora nodded, forcing herself to focus, to quiet the panic that threatened to overtake her. She felt Tay's presence as a shield, yet she also understood that even he could not control everything. The men below were deliberate, patient, waiting for a mistake. The tension pressed against her like a physical weight. She had never felt so exposed and yet so alive. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly, every turn hiding another possibility of confrontation. Leora followed Tay's lead, her senses sharpened by every sound, the scrape of stone beneath a boot, the faint whisper of wind through the canyon, the distant cry of a bird startled by their passage. She could see the muscles in Tay's arms tense, the way his eyes flicked from shadow to shadow, assessing, calculating, always one step ahead. She realized that survival here demanded more than courage. It demanded awareness, intuition, and trust. Suddenly, a twig snapped underfoot. Leora froze, her heart hammering in her chest. One of the men turned sharply, eyes scanning the canyon. Tay's hand went to his bow, silent and swift. He moved between her and the danger, a living shield, his presence a mixture of protection and quiet command. Leora felt a shiver pass through her, not from cold, but from the closeness of the man who had become her anchor, her guide, and, in ways she barely understood, her heart. The men's attention shifted as a distant shout echoed through the canyon, a warning carried on the wind, moved with precision, guiding Leora to a narrow crevice that offered concealment. They pressed against the rock, breathing shallowly, listening as the figures below debated in harsh tones. The tension was suffocating, the kind that made Leora aware of every heartbeat, every whisper of movement, every possibility of discovery. She wanted to speak, to ask what would happen next, but Tay's hand pressed gently against her arm, a silent command to wait, to observe. Time stretched, each second heavy with suspense. Leora's mind raced, imagining every scenario: capture, confrontation, escape. But yet beneath the fear there was a strange exhilaration, realization that she had stepped fully into a life where every decision mattered, where courage and cunning could tip the balance between safety and disaster. Finally, Tay made a decision. With careful movements, he led her through a series of jagged rocks, each step calculated, deliberate. Leora followed, trusting him implicitly, her senses straining to catch any sign of danger. The men below were focused on their own strategies, unaware of the pair slipping past, almost as if the land itself conspired to shield them. They reached a hidden alcove above the valley floor, a place that offered a commanding view of the encampment. Leora crouched beside Tay, her breath caught in her throat as she surveyed the scene. Fires burned in small rings, tents clustered in deliberate patterns, and figures moved with quiet purpose. The valley was alive, a world of intricate alliances, rivalries, and unseen threats. And she understood that they were in the midst of a story much larger than herself, a story where danger and desire intertwined. Tay leaned close, his voice a whisper. "We must move at night. The valley is watching. Every shadow could be an enemy, every flicker of light a trap. Are you ready?" Leora nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of anticipation. She had learned much in the days since leaving home, the lessons of survival, the codes of the land, the unspoken language of trust and caution. Yet she knew that the ultimate test was coming, a confrontation that could determine not just their safety, but the course of everything they had built. Night fell like a curtain, and the valley transformed. Shadows deepened, shapes shifted, and the wind carried both warning and opportunity. Leora moved beside Tay, her senses heightened, her heart pounding not just from fear, but from the closeness of the man who had become her protector, her confidant, and, in ways she did not yet fully understand, the center of her world. They advanced carefully, every movement deliberate, every sound accounted for. Leora could see the figures in the encampment more clearly now, their vigilance intense, their suspicion palpable. She felt a thrill of adrenaline as she realized the magnitude of what they were attempting. Each step forward was a risk, a challenge to their skill and courage, and the tension between them was nearly unbearable. At the edge of the encampment, Tay paused, signaling her to stop. He pressed a finger to his lips, his dark eyes flicking to every corner, every shadow. Leora felt a shiver pass through her, not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. She had never been so aware of another human presence, so conscious of the stakes, so drawn to a man whose life was as intertwined with danger as it was with the land itself. A sudden noise, a branch snapping underfoot, made them both freeze. Tay's bow was ready in an instant, his body a taut line of controlled energy. Leora held her breath, every muscle rigid, every sense alert. The men in the valley below stirred, their heads turning, their eyes searching. It was the kind of moment she had imagined countless times in dreams, a test of courage and instinct, and yet the reality was far more intense, far more consuming. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A woman, her face partially covered, eyes sharp and calculating. Leora could sense the weight of history in her gaze, a challenge that spoke of old debts, secrets, and power struggles. Tay did not flinch, his stance unyielding, but the tension in the air was palpable. Leora felt the pull of fear and desire, the thrill of danger, and the unspoken promise that what came next could change everything. The woman spoke in a language Leora did not understand, her voice cold and measured. Tay responded with equal calm, a mixture of warning and negotiation. Leora watched, heart racing, as the two engaged in a battle of words, strategy, and unspoken power. She understood that this was more than a confrontation. It was a test, a moment that could determine survival, loyalty, and the fragile bond she shared with Tay. Minutes stretched into hours as they held their positions, each aware of the other's intentions, each waiting for the first sign of weakness. Leora felt herself trembling, not just from fear, but from the intensity of the emotions coursing through her. Every glance from Tay carried reassurance and tension, every movement a lesson in patience and courage. And in the quiet moments between commands and warnings, she realized the depth of her feelings for him, the bond that had grown from shared danger, trust, and quiet moments of connection. The wind shifted, carrying new sounds, voices from the distant ridge, the faint clatter of hooves. Leora's heart leaped. The valley was alive with possibilities, threats, and the unrelenting uncertainty that had come to define her days. And yet beneath it all, there was a strange exhilaration, a sense that the challenges ahead were not just tests of survival but of character, courage, and the strength of the heart. Tay leaned close, his voice a low rumble. "We may have to move faster than expected. Are you ready for what comes next?" Leora met his gaze, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "I'm ready," she whispered, though her voice carried both fear and determination. The valley below remained tense, the figures within it watchful and alert. The stage was set for a confrontation that could change everything, a moment where danger, desire, and destiny converged. Leora felt the weight of the story she had become part of pressing down on her, and yet she also felt the power of choice, courage, and the bond she shared with Tay. As darkness deepened and the wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, Leora realized that the next steps would demand everything she had learned, everything she had become, and everything she could yet discover. The climax of their journey was near, the tension unbearable, the stakes higher than ever. And in the quiet anticipation, she felt a spark of hope, a promise that despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, something profound awaited them on the other side of the night. The first light of dawn broke over the valley, painting the rugged cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. Leora stirred, her heart still pounding from the events of the night. The confrontation in the canyon had tested everything she had learned, every lesson Tay had taught her, and she now understood the weight of courage and trust in ways she could never have imagined. She rose quietly, brushing the frost from her cloak, and found Tay already awake, his eyes scanning the horizon as he always did, vigilant and unyielding. "You did well," he said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and relief. "The valley respects strength, but it also respects those who do not falter in the face of danger." Leora smiled, a tired but genuine expression. She felt the tension of the past days begin to ease, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and belonging. She had faced fear, navigated treacherous paths, and survived encounters that could have ended their journey. And through it all, she had learned to trust not just Tay, but herself, her instincts, her courage, and her heart. The encampment below was quiet now, the men cautious but no longer threatening. It seemed the events of the previous night had shifted the balance, and whispers of respect spread through the valley like wildfire. Leora watched as Tay moved among the figures, commanding presence and calm authority marking every step. She realized that the man she had feared, admired, and grown to care for was more than a protector. Was a leader, a force of nature who could shape the course of the land and the lives of those within it. Kiona appeared beside her, his young face alight with curiosity and cautious optimism. "They will leave us in peace now," he said, his voice soft but confident. "They have seen your courage." Leora nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The boy had been a constant reminder of the innocence and hope that persisted even in the harshest places, and she felt a sense of responsibility and affection for him. The valley had tested all of them, but it had also shown that trust, courage, and compassion could prevail even in the most dangerous circumstances. Tay returned to her side, his expression softened by the relief of survival. "The valley has given us a chance," he said. But it is not just the land that tests us. It is the choices we make, the bonds we honor, and the courage we carry forward. Leora looked at him, her eyes reflecting both admiration and a quiet tenderness. "I've learned that," she said. "I've learned that courage is not just about facing dangers. It's about standing by those you care for, trusting in what you believe, and never giving up, even when the path is uncertain." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that carried more meaning than words could express. The tension of the past days, the fear, the uncertainty, the close brush with danger had transformed into a bond that was unbreakable. Leora realized that she had not only survived, but had grown stronger. and that the man beside her had become both her guide and her equal, a partner in every sense of the word. As they prepared to leave the valley behind, Leora took one last look at the rugged landscape. The mountains, the hidden streams, and the echoes of past struggles all seemed to speak to her now, not as threats, but as teachers. She understood that every challenge she had faced, every shadow she had feared, had led her to this moment of clarity and connection. And she knew that her journey with Tay was only beginning, but that together they could face whatever lay ahead. The ride back through the canyon was quiet, filled with a sense of accomplishment and reflection. Leora felt a new confidence in her stride, a sense of harmony with the land and the man beside her. She realized that the journey had taught her more than survival. It had taught her about love, trust, and the strength that comes from facing life fully, without hesitation or fear. When they reached the edge of the plains, Tay finally allowed himself a rare smile, the kind that reached his eyes and softened the edges of his usually stoic expression. "You have changed," he said, his voice low but warm, "and so have I this journey. It has shown me that even a life of solitude can be shared, that strength can be found in trust, and that the heart can guide us when the land cannot." Leora squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of emotion she could not contain. "I've learned that the world is wider and more alive than I ever imagined. That courage, love, and trust can grow even in the most dangerous places, and that some people are worth every risk." They paused at the edge of the river that marked the border of the valley, the water glinting in the morning light. It was a symbolic threshold, a line between the past filled with uncertainty and the future full of possibility. Tay looked at her, the wind teasing strands of hair across her face, and in that moment, the unspoken understanding between them was complete. They had survived, learned, and grown together. The bond forged in the crucible of danger and discovery was now unbreakable, and the promise of what lay ahead shimmered like the river beneath their feet. Kiona ran ahead, his laughter echoing across the plains, a reminder of the hope in life that persisted despite hardship. Leora watched him, feeling a surge of affection and a sense of purpose. She knew that their journey had not just been about survival or love, had been about learning the value of courage, compassion, and the choices that define who we are. The valley, the mountains, the people, and the dangers they had faced had all shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and ready for the life that awaited beyond the horizon. As they rode together into the open plains, Leora felt the warmth of the sun on her face, the wind at her back, and the steady presence of Tay beside her. Every step of the journey had brought her closer to understanding the depth of human resilience, the power of connection, and the extraordinary force of love that could grow even in the most unlikely of places. She realized that the challenges they had faced had not broken them, they had forged them into something enduring and true. The road ahead was wide, filled with possibility, and free from the shadows that had haunted their past. Leora looked at Tay, her heart full, and saw, reflected in his eyes, the same mix of admiration, trust, and affection she felt. The danger had passed, the mystery had been revealed, and the bond they shared had been tested and proven unshakable. And in that shared silence, they both understood that the story they had begun in fear and uncertainty was now one of hope, courage, and love. They rode on, leaving the valley behind, but carrying its lessons with them: the value of resilience, the strength found in trust, and the power of a bond forged through shared trials. The plains stretched endlessly, open to the future, and Leora felt a deep peace settle in her chest. She knew that she had been changed forever, that the girl who had left her home was now a woman shaped by courage, love, and the wisdom of experience. Tay spoke at last, his voice carrying the warmth of satisfaction and hope. "The world is wide, Leora, and now we face it together. Whatever comes, we face it side by side." She squeezed his hand in agreement, her eyes shining with gratitude and love. "Together," she said, knowing that the journey, while far from simple, had brought them to a place where courage, trust, and love could thrive. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the vast plains with its golden light, Leora felt a sense of completion, a harmony between the trials they had endured and the hope that lay ahead. The dangers had tested them, the valley had challenged them, and the bonds they had forged had been strengthened. And as they rode into the horizon, the story that had begun with uncertainty and fear now ended with courage, trust, and a love that promised a lifetime of shared journeys and unbroken hearts. The wind carried their laughter, The river shimmered in reflection of the morning sun, and the plains stretched endlessly before them. Leora and Tay, once strangers brought together by circumstance, now moved forward as partners, equals, and hearts intertwined. The story of survival, trust, and love had reached its moment of fulfillment, leaving behind lessons of courage, hope, and the extraordinary strength of the human heart. And as they disappeared into the distance, the valley behind them held only memories of danger and triumph. The lessons of the past firmly etched in their hearts, and the promise of a future full of possibility and love stretching ahead into the open golden plains.